how secure is Rootstock?
Well, I've spent some time analyzing Rootstock security from different perspectives. Like security, Rootstock is very special because it has a breach that is embedded into the blockchain, where in all other blockchains the breach is a separate project. So it's part of Rootstock. So if we want to analyze Rootstock, we have to analyze the breach, the merge mining, the way the procedures involved in upgrading the network. There's a lot of parts that are involved in security, and Rootstock has one of the best balances of all these components. Starting with merge mining, having more than 55% of Bitcoin miners mining Rootstock, the amount of hash rate and the it makes it impossible to revert. And from an outsider, right? From an outside attack. And from an inside attack, we have a mechanism that is an ad hoc system that is called Armadillo that monitors any attempt to revert and is able to alert the participants in a decentralized manner in order to prevent these kinds of attacks. And there are more proposals by the community to even improve the security of the merge mining. So I think that we've come to a point where merge mining is highly secure. And obviously, we want to continue to reach 80%, 90% of the Bitcoin hash rate.
Welcome to Rootstock Fundamentals, a series of conversations with some of the key contributors to Rootstock, Bitcoin's first and longest running sidechain. We've designed this series as a beginner's guide to Rootstock. So over the next few episodes, we'll explore Rootstock's origins, its cryptographic connection to Bitcoin, the security model used to protect Rootstock, and how the Rootstock network continues to evolve. Rootstock was the
Thanks.
first Bitcoin sidechain. It brings together the benefits of Bitcoin, security, store of value, widespread adoption, and decentralization with the benefits of Ethereum, smart contracts, programmability, token utility, and active developer community. This combination makes Rootstock the most secure smart contract platform on the planet. And this episode, I'm joined by Sergio Lerner, Chief Scientist at Rootstock Labs, co-founder of Rootstock Labs, and long-term contributor to the Rootstock blockchain. And we're going to talk about the security architecture of Rootstock and the principle of defense in depth and how that principle works in the Rootstock blockchain. So, hey, Sergio, welcome to Rootstock.
Hi, Daniel. Thanks for having me in this excellent episode to show the community more about Rootstock. Excellent idea.
It's great to have you here. So let's get started with some of the easy stuff and some of the classics. When did you first buy Bitcoin?
Mm. Well, actually, I never bought Bitcoin.
Did somebody send it to you?
Well, I started working at it was 2012, I think, for the Bitcoin Foundation. I became the chief security auditor, and I was paid by the Bitcoin Foundation at the time to keep an eye on every single commit that was done to the code repository, to the Bitcoin Core code repository, and make sure there was no vulnerability that could slip into the code. So it was almost a year that I review every single commit, and I found actually several problems, several vulnerabilities that obviously I responsibly reported to the core development team at the time.
And so that was 2012. When did you start working on Rootstock then?
Well, we met for the first time to discuss Rootstock in 2015 with the other Argentinian Bitcoiners. So we started thinking. Well, this was the time of the block size wars. There was a lot of problems upgrading Bitcoin. So we say, okay, how can we build on top of Bitcoin? How can create this open permissionless financial system on top of Bitcoin in a way that doesn't require a change to Bitcoin, that we can show the world the power of layer twos, and then, I mean, we can find a way to upgrade Bitcoin to make this a more trustless communication between these two layers. But at first, we said, okay, let's do this and show the world how it can be done. And actually, we were the first to do it. You know the story.
I do know the story. I know it very well. And we've spoken before about the early days of your involvement in the Bitcoin community.
Yeah.
and you've told me about the feeling of belonging that you had, that feeling that very quickly you felt like you'd sort of found your people. Can you tell me
Yeah.
about that feeling? Can you tell me about that period when you started to be pulled into the space and you felt like you had a place?
Yeah, well, I was an entrepreneur. I had a medical device company. I mean, very successful company. 20 people I had to manage, uh, building medical devices. But I learned about Bitcoin, and it just blew my mind. I mean, it was something out of this world. And I jumped to see the code, and I was fascinated with the simplicity of the code and the marvelous consequences that it would have in the future. Like, I could foresee this becoming a real cryptocurrency of the internet. It was the concept of store of value was not really there, but the idea that it could be global cryptocurrency, it was already there. So I started working less and less on my company and more on Bitcoin. This was 2011, actually. Yeah, and trying to find vulnerabilities in the code, ways to help this project, and I got super engaged. But all my contributions, I did it from home, remotely. Nobody knew about me. I didn't go to conferences. But back in 2013, I published this article about Satoshi fortune, that what I call the Patoshi pattern, and suddenly I got a lot of attention. And like, my blog post about Satoshi got like 30,000 views in 2 days. Like, it was massive. Like, I thought, okay, this is something. I'm not feeling the heat. I was criticized. I was some people loved the article about Satoshi, and that time I met Wenceslao Cázares, the founder of Xapo, and he told me personally, he was in Buenos Aires. He told me, you have to go to a conference and feel what it feels to build this new financial ecosystem. It's not something that you are going to feel back in your home. People need to know about you physically. So I say, okay, this is the time. I went to San Jose Bitcoin conference in 2013, and it just was the first time, as you mentioned, the first time in my life that I felt that it was part of something, right? Something bigger than me, like a movement to change the world for good.
And then
And
the journey from 2013 to the launch of the RSK, now Rootstock white paper, and then the work that followed to build Rootstock. Thinking in that period of your life,
yeah,
what were some of the emotions? What are some of the feelings that you have when you think about that period, the people you were working with to actually build the first version of Rootstock? What are some of the emotions that you come to mind when you think about that time?
well, first, before the creation of Rootstock, I created the first smart contract platform that was called QuickCoin. And as soon as I created the platform, I realized that I wouldn't be able to launch it as a separate token, because my heart was on Bitcoin, and I thought really that we should all pool our forces and our power to bring this currency to life in a way that is overwhelmingly useful for people. So for me, building layers two was not something it was a mandate. I wouldn't be able to create an altcoin at this point in time. So I started working on ways to create L2 very soon, as soon as 2014. And this was, as I mentioned, this controversy about how to improve Bitcoins, how to expand Bitcoin, and the hash, the block size wars basically split the community in two, and it became much harder to upgrade Bitcoin. So the idea of building layers two became like the natural path for me to explore. And so it was very turbulent times when we built when we built Rootstock. We didn't know if the future of Bitcoin will be so successful as it is today.
Because
It
what else
was
was happening? I mean, we're talking 2016, 2017. That was the sort of building period, right?
Yeah.
And
So
of course, Ethereum had launched early
yes,
2016, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes.
Um,
So
so obviously there's a lot of excitement and a lot of attention being pulled towards that, and yet you're building something really quite
yes,
different, right?
yes. So I actually I worked helping in the design of the Ethereum network because I wanted to learn what was the best way to create an L2, and I saw the amount of excitement that Ethereum got from developers, and essentially I also realized that a lot of that excitement came because of a new token. Like there was a lot of excitement because of the technology, but obviously a lot of people were excited because they wanted to get this 10x, 100x yield of holding a new token.
But also it gives them the ability to own part of the own part of the not just the upside, but the value both up and down of the ownership of the future of Ethereum, right? It's
Yeah,
that
totally.
a piece of the
So
pie is mine, right?
yeah,
I am part of this. I'm vested. I have skin in the game.
totally. But what I wanted to do is take the best possible technology and bring that to Bitcoin, and find a way to engage Bitcoiners in the same way that Ethereum managed to engage Ethereans, right? But you know that those times were very hard. There was very little engagement. Bitcoiners were very not fond of moving their bitcoins out of the Bitcoin network, even if we worked very hard to get to a point where we had possibly the best federated peg that exists today, using advanced HSMs, using the most decentralized peg that you can build with the restrictions that obviously Bitcoin imposes, right? And so even with all that hard work, Bitcoiners were at that point in time were not willing to move most of the funds to Rootstock to really get this financial inclusion dream that we were expecting.
So if you
But
could, I mean, you're referencing a period of what sounds like, I don't want to put words in your mouth here, but it sounds like a certain amount of uncertainty and anxiety. If you could like, I mean, in single words or in short phrases, how would you describe that period? How did it feel?
yeah, I was a little bit disappointed because I thought, okay, we have the best technology, even better than Ethereum. Why can't Bitcoiners come to Rootstock? And what I found was that the use case for Rootstock was not at that point in time in Bitcoiners, but mostly in Latin American people that needed a way to protect their savings, to escape the capital controls, to be able to trade globally with all the restrictions that they had. So actually, we found a great community for Rootstock within Latin America, and Bitcoiners came later.
Amazing. Okay, so what a great intro. So let's move now into the main discussion. We're going to talk about defense in depth.
Yeah.
So let's start with some fundamentals and then move through. So, firstly, what is the blockchain trilemma? My understanding, at very high level, is you can't optimize for security, scalability, and decentralization all at the same time. Invariably, you end up optimizing for one or two and then fall back on the third. Can
Yeah.
you maybe go into that's the kind of high level idea, but can you maybe go into a bit more detail about this and how it factors into some of the design choices around Rootstock?
Yeah. So this trilemma was an idea that you basically, if you want to get more decentralized, then you have to give up either security or fast transactions. But what actually happened in practice is that people got ways to optimize the three of them, like moving in a different plane, like in a different layer. And so basically the trilemma still stands, but people found a lot more ways to optimize the implementations and get some, let's say, constant increases in both transaction throughput, security, and decentralization. So it is a trilemma, it's true, but human ingenuity can always find ways to improve the implementations, find better designs, and manage to improve all of them together. But of course, there is a limitation, but maybe we are still far away from the real limit in those three axes.
So maybe to provide some examples, then you could argue, for example, that Bitcoin is highly secure, highly decentralized, but struggles with scalability. I'm simplifying here, but that would
Yeah,
be one argument. You
yeah,
could argue that proof of stake blockchains are highly scalable and can be very decentralized, but there are security challenges around that.
yeah,
That would be the way that it balances off.
yeah.
Do you have any other examples for us to understand this trilemma?
Well, taking as an example, proof of stake versus proof of work. Um, Proof of stake, it's it's faster and basically allows you to create blocks without working on them. So you can essentially shuffle very easily, which is the block producer. Uh, but there is a fundamental limitation of proof of stake, which is called the nothing at stake problem, which is that since you are not consuming any resource, and not electricity nor space, and then there is the possibility to rebuild the chain after a long time with no effort. Like if the stakers decide to leave because of any of the market conditions, their keys have certain value to revert the chain afterwards. So these are called long range attacks. And this is one fundamental limitation of proof of stake, where in proof of work, there is a resource that is consumed and you cannot revert the chain, even having enormous amount of hash rate, because the chain is moving forward, adding more and more hash rate. So that's an example.
So, thinking about security, then as an opener, we often talk about Rootstock being the most secure smart contract platform in the world. How secure is Rootstock?
Well, I've spent some time analyzing Rootstock security from different perspectives. Like security, Rootstock is very special because it has a breach that is embedded into the blockchain, where in all other blockchains the breach is a separate project. So it's part of Rootstock. So if we want to analyze Rootstock, we have to analyze the breach, the merge mining, the way the procedures involved in upgrading the network. There's a lot of parts that are involved in security, and Rootstock has one of the best balances of all these components. Starting with merge mining, having more than 55% of Bitcoin miners mining Rootstock, the amount of hash rate and the it makes it impossible to revert. And from an outsider, right? From an outside attack. And from an inside attack, we have a mechanism that is an ad hoc system that is called Armadillo, that monitors any attempt to revert and is able to alert the participants in a decentralized manner in order to prevent these kinds of attacks. And there are more proposals by the community to even improve the security of the merge mining. So I think that we've come to a point where merge mining is highly secure. And obviously, we want to continue to reach 80%, 90% of the Bitcoin hash rate, because there is money on the table, right? There is money that miners are not taking. Well, some are, but some are not. And sooner or later, they will realize that Rootstock fees, and they contribute to Bitcoin security, and it's money that they can take very easily by starting merge mining today, which is kind of very, very easy. And another angle to look at Rootstock is the peg. So we started with a federated peg. Initially, it was not very different from multi-sig federated systems, but as soon as we launched it, we realized that we need to move to a much better system, and so we added to this system the HSMs. So the HSMs are hardware security models. They are tamper-proof, and initially they store the private key, and these systems were connected to sandboxed environment, a server that communicated with the HSM and commanded the HSM to sign the different payout transactions. And also we grew the federation up to 11 members to make it more decentralized, not only in terms of jurisdictions, but also geographically, in all kinds of ways to make it more resilient, right? But at that point, we realized we need to do better than that. So instead of letting these servers command the HSMs, we decided that we would embed an SPV node, a Rootstock SPV node inside the HSMs so that they basically follow the hash rate. So what we have today is something that we call the proof of work HSM or PoW HSMs, which are devices that they work in a standalone fashion. They follow Rootstock hash rate. They have a full an SPV node running inside them, so they cannot be cheated. Like you cannot command the device to sign a payout transaction, even if you are a member of the federation, what we call the pegnatories.
And I think when I've perhaps when people hear hardware security module, they think and they hear pegnatories, they almost have an image of 9 people in offices around the world with like ledgers on a keychain, signing transactions. But that fundamentally, that is not what's happening, right?
Totally.
What can you describe what the hardware security modules are?
Yeah.
Physically.
The hardware security modules are ledger devices. They are provided directly by the manufacturer, by Ledger, which is one of the main manufacturers of hardware wallets. They have a secure element inside. This is a special microcontroller that is used for credit cards. It's tamper-proof, so you cannot extract the private key. The private keys are generated by the device, not during manufacturing, but during installation of the device. And these devices are connected to headless servers, which are in secure rooms, right? And there is no human interaction. There are some additional security measures. There are some to turn the device on. There are some secrets that are also stored in the server, partially in the device. But essentially, this is a headless system, an automated system that through the computer that connects to the Rootstock network, it receives the Rootstock blocks and it's able to detect the events that the Rootstock network creates to perform the payout signing process. And all the process is commanded by a smart contract on the blockchain, which makes this system completely transparent and completely auditable, which very, very few systems, federated systems, are as auditable as the Rootstock system.
So we're getting into the details of the idea of defense in depth here, which is really, really helpful. But just to sort of tackle one of the arguments I think people sometimes have, or the idea that they have that this is a multi-sig, right? There's a bunch of people with ledgers and they're pressing buttons and unlocking funds. Fundamentally, that is not the case. And even if you hypothetically did have all of the devices in the same room and you had people with keys to the secure, I mean, again, hypothetically, if you could magically bring all of these rooms together into the same place, you couldn't do anything with it, right?
Correct. Yeah, the only thing
There's
you
no
can
one
do.
to hold hostage.
Yeah, there is an attack, which is basically to turn off all devices, and there is also a security backup system in that particular case, which takes control back of the devices 1 year later. But essentially, that's the harshest attack that you can do on these devices. And of course, you would need coordination from all the pegnatories, which is ridiculous, right? Because they are heavily incentivized to participate honestly on the network.
And so, just we're touching on a concept here, which is defense in depth.
Yeah.
So, my understanding is defense in depth is a concept of military strategy. This idea that you Roman military strategy, where you would essentially cede control to the enemy to bring them into a space that you partially were able to defend, and you could then counterattack by enveloping, right? Now, my understanding is also that is, when we talk about defense in depth in a computer science perspective, we're talking about something slightly different, because you wouldn't necessarily counterattack unless you're in some kind of, I mean, potentially you could create a honey trap, which would be a traditional Roman defense in depth
Mhm.
approach. But when we're talking about it, what we're essentially saying, I mean, if you want a visual metaphor, you have 10 or 11 or 12 different gates or traps or mechanisms, and you have to somehow get through all of them. And even if you do get through all of them, your approach would be invalidated. So we're referring to that. We're not necessarily talking about a counterattack mechanism. We're talking about a series of multiple different barriers you would need to overcome. Is that
So,
this is the
yeah.
concept, right?
Yeah, so I didn't know the military history about defensive depth. I love that part. But what I know from cybersecurity is that defensive depth, as you mentioned, is having several layers or barriers that protects you. So basically, these barriers protect you from your own mistakes, from your own code bugs, right? Mostly. So when we said we create a federation instead of having a single party, we are applying defense in depth. We are saying, okay, but if the party is hacked, how are we going to be protected, right? And when we add a server that is, with an isolated environment, as we did, we add a new layer of defense in depth. We have our servers are isolated in a sense; they are protected from the environment. And when we add the hardware security mode, then that's defense in depth. Like even if the server is compromised, they cannot access the hardware security mode. And when we add the light client inside the device, that's defense in depth, because not even having access to physically devices, you or if you are able to access the pegnatory or threaten the pegnatory, you are not even able to do that. But the same strategy we have applied in other layers. For instance,
so maybe let's do that then. So at a high level, can you lay out some of the different defense mechanisms that Rootstock employs to prevent attacks? And
yeah.
there are many. I mean, there potentially. I mean, I've got a rough list here, but there are. Can you maybe off the top of your head just list them
Yeah.
at a very high level, and then maybe let's go into each one in some detail. So
So I'm one of the systems that I mentioned is Armadillo, and Armadillo is a system that has two parts. One is a consensus change on Rootstock that basically puts some information of the Rootstock network inside Bitcoin blocks, so that if you are able to monitor Bitcoin blocks, you are able to detect any attempt of fork of the Rootstock network. So basically, we make any attempt of attack uh, available to anyone. Like it's kind of using Bitcoin as a data availability layer, so that if you want to attack Rootstock and you are still want to merge mine Bitcoin to preserve your revenue, then you are going to be forced to show the world your attack strategy
right.
on real time. So that's another defensive idea. But on the design of the consensus of Rootstock, we knew about several attacks that were, we being discussed at the time. One of the attacks that was discussed in 2013 is one called fee snipping. Fee snipping is basically what happens when the issuance of Bitcoin, it was born in the Bitcoin community. Like what would happen if the issuance of Bitcoin goes down, and then at some point in time, the subsidy is so low that miners try to, snip transactions, to steal transactions from other blocks, reverting blocks in order to earn the transaction fees. If the main revenue comes only from transaction fees, then basically there's this scenario where miners could try to steal transactions from other miners' blocks, reverting single blocks. So since Rootstock does not have a subsidy because it's a Bitcoin sidechain, we had to solve this problem right from the start. So we are solving a problem that Bitcoin will have maybe in 10 years. We are solving it now. And how we solved it is by smoothing the rewards in a particular mathematical way that miners are not incentivized at all from snipping, from stealing transactions. Like they always have the incentive to build on top of other miners' blocks. Okay, and it makes a Rootstock mining system more cooperative instead of competitive, because each of the miners takes only a 10% of the transaction fees, and the rest is reserved for the future miners. Okay, so it's kind of everyone is contributing to a kind of a shared account for all future miners, right? And this prevents, for instance, this attack. And
So
there are
this is
more attacks that we have prevented from the design. Yeah,
so this is fee smoothing. We also used to have the locking cap. So the locking cap was in place. I think it was
yeah,
removed about maybe like 18 months ago, 12 months, 18 months ago. The locking cap was a limit on how much Bitcoin could be brought into the two-way peg.
yeah.
And this was a threshold that contributors to Rootstock put in place to limit the amount of Bitcoin that came in case something happened. That's now been removed. What was the original thinking behind that? What was the original
The-
thinking behind
yeah,
having the locking cap?
yeah. So the original thing is that systems only get open source systems only get secured over time as they
Okay.
mature. All systems in the beginning have bugs. All bugs, the bugs are fixed over time. No human-made software has ever been, uh, with lack of bugs. So we wanted to make sure that the network growth was capped, and as as time passed, we could increase this cap. And so we were fully sure that the network was capable of withstanding that amount of pressure, because any bitcoins you put in the peg is a bug bounty for for hackers to steal. And we did it. We moved this ceiling up and up, and by a procedure which involves multiple signatures. It's not controlled by a single party. It was not controlled by a single party, but by multiple signatures in the community. And at the certain point in time, we decided, when I say we, I mean obviously the community, in a community call, we decided that there was the time for removal of this cap was no longer needed, because we had the proof of work HSMs 2.0, which were the devices that basically run SPV nodes. So it was removed by a transaction. It was not, a hard fork was not required, because the network was already prepared for this cap to be removed. So it was a single transaction and the cap was removed. And yeah, there was a lot of complexity in the code to support the cap. So we were very happy to be able to remove it forever and simplify the code, which
And so
also
now it's removed
security.
theoretically,
Yeah,
not even theoretically, practically.
yeah,
21 million Bitcoins can enter Rootstock.
yeah. You have to subtract Satoshi's Bitcoin from that. So
Yes,
I
true.
would say
Well, I mean,
20 million.
there's always hope that he might emerge and start moving his money around. So denial of service protection. There's a network message rate limiter. What's the threat and what's the defense mechanism?
Well, one of the discoveries I made was a denial of service attack to the Ethereum network. And I obviously, this was a couple of years ago. I reported it. I got a bad bounty because of that, and it was an attack to the Ethereum network layer. And so I realized that even if we were quite good in that sense, adding a new layer of protection was the right thing to do. So again, we applied the concept of defense in depth, and we added to the network a rate limiter, which basically limits the amount of messages each account can create, or the amount of bytes that each account can distribute over the memory pool, the mempool, until the blocks, until the transactions get included in the blocks. So if you want to spam this the Rootstock network, is very, very hard, because as soon as you start pushing transactions into the network resists the attack and slows you down. So this is a means for preventing future attacks, something maybe a class of attacks that we are maybe not aware of, but it's part of the design in depth ideas.
Do you know if any other networks have these kind of DOS protections in place, apart from obviously Ethereum and EVMs?
Well, Bitcoin in the early times had a rate limiter only for free transactions, like for transactions that were below the dust limit. And so it had a rate limiter. So the idea was coming from Bitcoin, actually, but basically to implement that on Rootstock, it's much more complex, because there are a lot of moving parts in a Rootstock transaction. You consume space, but you also consume CPU. So it's you have to balance all those variables, right? But as far as I know, apart from Bitcoin and Rootstock, there is no network having actually a rate limiter on the network layer. Not even Ethereum.
Okay, so transaction fee spending limit. What's the why is that defense mechanism in place, and what is it protecting against?
Yeah, one of the things that what we saw in Ethereum in the beginning was people spending by mistake huge amount of money of Ether in fees.
Mm.
And sometimes they were able to recover them, sometimes they were not. And one of the first principles that we have today is that we have to protect the user as much as we can. It's not okay to leave the user as a target for attacks or as of his own mistakes, right? If we can do something in the consensus layer to protect the users against his own mistakes, then let's do it, right? So what we added, and I think this, the proposal was it was one of mine, is to limit the maximum amount of fees that you can spend. So if the established fee rate at certain point is X, then you cannot spend more than 50 times X on transaction fees, or 10 times X. I don't remember the exact ratio, but essentially a multiplier of the minimum transaction cost. So you are protected. If you try to do that, the network won't let you. But also, this was another protection against fee snipping, because if you create a transaction that has an overwhelming amount of fees, either on purpose or by mistake, then the fee smoothing mechanism ceases to work. It's not enough to protect a miner from trying to steal that transaction. So by limiting the maximum amount of gas price that can be paid, we basically add still another protection against fee snipping. So it had two ideas behind it.
And you would kind of class this as a human error. This is defense against human error, basically.
Yeah. Yes.
Okay, super interesting.
There is another protection. Sorry to interrupt.
Yeah.
Another protection that Rootstock had in this consensus is in 2017, I think, I found a vulnerability in Ethereum. Also, I reported. It's called the ankle mining problem. It was a problem with proof of work Ethereum, which basically there was a huge incentive to instead of mining main blocks, to start mining ankle blocks, because the supply curve, you could expand the supply curve, like produce more bitcoins in the same time by mining some ankle blocks along your main blocks. And there was a lot of incentives to actually do this.
Maybe for those listening, what's the difference in a main block and an uncle block?
Well, when there is competition, where there is some called a stale block, sometimes called an orphan block, which is two blocks that occupy the same height or the same number in the blockchain. In networks like Rootstock and Ethereum, they use a protocol called Ghost, which basically chooses one of the two siblings and the other gets some reward. And it's included, but the transaction included in that sibling block are not actually executed. But the block is still referenced because there is still a payment that goes into the miner that created this ankle block, right? So this is needed to create a high throughput proof of work network. It is one of the mechanisms.
It was able to generate the right result, but it did so alongside another miner which generated the right result at the same time, essentially. And the network has to choose one.
Yes, the network has to choose one, but the other is still rewarded. And I detected that
because it simplifying this, it got the answer correct, right?
Yeah, because it spent a lot of work. So if you don't reward it, then you basically get competition and basically something called selfish mining, where one miner would prefer to mine on top of his own block instead of mining on top of the honest chain, because he already has produced a block which competes with the honest chain. Right. So basically, the problem in Ethereum was that miners would prefer to mine ankle blocks, which do not contribute to increasing the throughput of the network and to get a higher reward over time. And this bug was reported, but Rootstock, because I already knew about the consequences of creating money out of thin air to pay from these anchor blocks. In case of Rootstock, we use a different algorithm which basically shares the reward between the main block and the sibling blocks. It's fully shared in equal parts, so that there is actually no way to create more money than the money that is distributed on fees. So another way that Rootstock is protected from this.
Are there any others that come to mind off the top of your head? Any other defense mechanisms and why they're in place?
We've talked about
Yeah, we talked about the PoW HSM, the rate limiter, transaction fee spending limit, locking cap, fee smoothing, fee sniping, long record attacks.
not that I remember. Do
These
you?
are the big ones.
Do you remember one more?
I wish. Maybe I get a bounty. Okay, so proof of work versus proof of stake. Rootstock uses merge mining to connect the Bitcoin proof of work consensus mechanism into Rootstock.
Yeah.
How does merge mining factor into the security architecture of Rootstock? And I guess within this, there's a consideration around the trade-offs between proof of work and proof of stake. So maybe perhaps it'd be helpful to do a very quick summary of the pros and cons of each approach and why we've chosen, why the Rootstock contributors chose merge mining as the approach for Rootstock.
So there are many ways to analyze this. I will start first analyzing it from the point of view of a Bitcoin sidechain. A Bitcoin sidechain must be aligned with Bitcoin, right? And so let
me jump in. So the three simple criteria that we use to define a Bitcoin sidechain are cryptographic alignment through merge mining, Bitcoin, no competing money token, so Bitcoin as the gas token, and economic incentives being provided to the Bitcoin miners to therefore support. So you have economic alignment between Rootstock and Bitcoin, and that's how we define. So that's one of the definitions how we define a sidechain. There are obviously others, and this has become a sort of broader. Bitcoin L2s is a very loose term, but sidechains is a very specific term.
Totally.
So this is our sort of categorization. This is our definition of a sidechain. Sorry, continue.
Yeah. So as you mentioned, to be fully aligned with Bitcoin, we need to contribute to Bitcoin security, and Rootstock fees go directly to Bitcoin miners, so they can spend more on hash rate and contribute to Bitcoin security. We also collaborate with revenue to Bitcoin miners, which make it obviously better for them, for the ones that participate. And so these are basic things that connect Rootstock to Bitcoin. But there's also the thing about security, right? Merge mining, and when you pass a certain threshold of merge mining, you get a very high guarantee that the blockchain is not going to be reversed, right? Or reorganized. And at this point in time, I think that Rootstock is highly secure, probably one of the most secure blockchains. Surely, in terms of behind Bitcoin, in terms of hash rate, we are the second most secure.
Which is why we make the claim to be, or Rootstock makes the claim to be the most secure smart contract platform in the world. And when we think about that, it's the hashing power that's securing Rootstock through merge mining. It's the qualities of the peg. And to be very open, we are at Rootstock Labs, we're always looking for alternative architectures that could be used to connect Bitcoin and Rootstock. But today, the proof of work HSM remains in production, the most advanced Bitcoin bridge, if you will, that exists. And then I guess finally is the decentralized consensus mechanism that's being used here. So these are three elements that are used to support this claim. Well,
one of the things that we can add to that is that the proof of work HSMs provide attestation, public attestation, which these are messages signed by the device that are distributed to the whole network, like a variable. There is a page where you can actually verify for yourself that the device verifies that it's running the correct version of the firmware. And this really, there's no other federated HSM-based system on the space that does at this level of proof that the devices are actually running the actual firmware that protects the bitcoins. This is something that very few people talk about, but no other network, federated network in this ecosystem does that level of openness for people to trust the devices. Like, you don't need to know anyone of the signatories. It's enough if you go and check the attestation message produced by the device,
which are available on the rootstock.io website, and you
yeah.
can verify. I believe, I might be wrong, it's 7 of 9 of the signatories are attested and publicly available
Yeah.
today. It might be 8 of 9. I think we're nearly at all.
Yes.
Okay, very cool. We've had quite a run through all the different elements of architecture, the mechanisms that are used to secure rootstock. I just wanted to, before we come to a close, just zoom out a little bit. When I've spoke to you in the past, you're very good at explaining through analogy or example some of these what are highly complex systems. And I think this is one of the things that anyone working in the blockchain and wider crypto space is always grappling with is you have, just to stay up to date with what's happening in one ecosystem is hard, let alone, hundreds of ecosystems that exist out there. And sometimes we can abstract away the complexity of how these networks run by using analogies and examples. And that is both helpful and unhelpful. But when you think about blockchain networks, when you think about Rootstock, what analogies do you fall back on to help you understand how these systems work and how actors engaging in these systems interact with each other? You're not allowed to talk about Alice and Bob. I mean, we've discussed this prior to the call. But for example, sometimes the development of ecosystem, an analogy that's used is the foundation and formation of a frontier town, right? Who builds the roads? How do you attract businesses? Once the businesses are there, how do you generate revenue from those businesses to pay for the infrastructure and the roads? And this is often thought of when you're thinking about the idea of building an ecosystem. I'm interested to some of the analogies you fall back on, or some of the examples you fall back on to understand your work. I'd be just really interested to share with people what they are.
For me, it's very graphic. Like, for me, this is a stack where you have Bitcoin as a store of value, Rootstock and possibly Lightning Network as the most important second layers on top of Bitcoin, Rootstock providing smart contracts, Lightning providing very fast and cheap payments, both of these connected with bridge directly from Lightning to Rootstock, so that you can enter and get out of Rootstock very, very cheaply through Lightning. And on top of Rootstock, a myriad of new experimental rollups and new systems,
Right.
like state channels, anything, gaming platforms, gaming oriented rollups, payment oriented rollups, CK rollups, whatever you want, you can build on top of Rootstock. So for me, Rootstock is like the root of the tree of all this, of all the either experiments or platforms you want to create. So that has always been my vision for Rootstock, to be the center of new ideas and experimentation. Because one of the things that in the very early times people realized when Bitcoin was ossifying was all that excitement that comes from experimentation, from academic, innovations, was being left behind. So to channel all that through Rootstock into new layers is basically having the cake and eat it too, right?
Love it. Okay, so we have talked about a lot here. We ran through some of the early days of Rootstock and your feeling of belonging to the wider Bitcoin community and what that experience felt like. We talked about the blockchain trilemma. We've talked about how secure Rootstock really is. We went into detail about the PoW HSM and the secure rooms that these devices are kept in. The concept of defense in depth, some of the different defense mechanisms that are in place, the PoW HSM, the network message rate limiter, transaction fee, locking cap, fee smoothing, sniping as an attack vector and how that's addressed, the role that Armadillo plays. And we've also looked at the claim around why Rootstock claims to be the most secure smart contract platform in the world, talking about the hashing power that's securing Rootstock over 50% of Bitcoin today, the qualities of the peg, and how this still remains the biggest in terms of value locked Bitcoin bridge in production today, and the decentralized consensus mechanism that supports Rootstock. Sergio, this was really, really great. I mean, we get a lot of opportunities to talk about some of these things at Rootstock Labs. It's really great to share some of these ideas with the wider world. So thanks so much for doing this with me. I know we're going to be talking again in the future when we share some of our plans about what's coming next for Rootstock. And yeah, it's going to be an exciting couple of months. So yeah, thanks so much for coming along.
Thanks you very much. I have a lot of new ideas and innovation that is coming from Rootstock Labs that we want to share with the community. And I hope that we have another conversation soon.
Brilliant. Thank you, Sergio. And thanks everybody who's watching or listening. This was awesome. More episodes coming. So check them out.